Hello and welcome to The Hub on CGTN. I'm Huang Jiyuan in Beijing. As the world faces increasing challenges, from global governance and regional security to climate change and food security, international cooperation has never been more important. How can nations work together to build sustainable partnerships that transcend geopolitical tensions and promote long-term mutual benefits? How can we ensure that global challenges are addressed through collaboration rather than confrontation? To delve deeper into these questions, we are honored to talk to Grzegorz Kołodko, former Deputy Prime Minister of Poland and distinguished professor at Beijing Normal University's Belt and Road School. Professor, thank you for joining us on the program. So next year, China will unveil its 15th five-year plan. Since your work here in China and both on the international stage, what do you look for in this 15th five-year plan the most? What priorities or key structural transformations do you expect?
Domestically, I think it is critical to shift the driving force for economic growth from investment and export to consumption. It's still very interesting why China's society is not prone to spend more on consumption. And the more EU policy will be during the 15 years, 5 years plan, 2026, 2030, favorable toward this restructuring from investment to consumption, the better for sustaining economic growth. I think it is still feasible to stay the course of plus minus 5% rate of growth annually on the average during next 5 years in terms of GDP, which is absolutely necessary to keep also social stability, etc. On the international scale, I think it is balancing the current account, the trade balance. And here is a very interesting point, which I would like to link to what we have said before. Yes, because of the American attitude, which is sinophobic to China, the export from China to US this year under Trump 2.0, under Trump's second administration, what I'm discussing in my new book, is going down. But at the same time, export of China elsewhere, including European Union, upon which you were asking, including the rest of Asia, Middle East, Africa, is growing. So, contrary to President of the United States' intention, China is not weakening, it's not being weakened. China is stronger, but the structure of the Chinese economic power in the world is changing. China is less significant as an economic partner for the United States, but at the same time, contrary to the American intentions, is more important as an economic power for so-called global South and also for the European Union. And I think that this direction of restructuring the world economy, where China will be not weaker, China will be stronger, but in a different way. And I think it's a factor which is contributing to the peaceful development of the world, which is not seen always in this same way by some policymakers in the West.
Since you work in the Belt and Road School at the Beijing Normal University, I want to ask you, where do you see as the most significant or the most underappreciated factor of the BRI that could shape globalization in the future?
I'm positive about Belt and Road Initiative. You know, after all, during this 12, 13 years of Belt and Road Initiative, which was launched about 2012, China has invested directly in the remaining part of the world, something in an order of $1.3 billion. Very few in Europe, a little bit in old EU members like Italy and Greece, maybe a little more in some East European countries, more in Hungary, which is more sympathetic towards China than, say, in my country of Poland, which is regrettable. But basically, these are the investment all over the world. I was a couple of years, for instance, in Djibouti and Ethiopia. I was traveling by hitchhiking, by trucks and by buses. Now there is the railroad from Addis Ababa to Djibouti, from Central Africa to the coast. There are the trains, hundreds of them, going from different cities in China to Europe via Russia or Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Poland to Western Europe. There is the big new harbor, Chacay, at the eastern side of Latin America, north of Lima, capital of Peru, which was opened a year ago with the participation of President Xi Jinping of his way for the G20 summit last year in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. All of this is the result of Belt and Road Initiative. And now there is another interesting question which is not being raised that often. How many million people, especially in Asia, in Middle East, in Africa, much less in my part of the world, how many million people had got a job, opportunity, engagement because of investment executed within the framework of Belt and Road Initiative? The answer is several dozen of millions of people are not unemployed. They got a job because of the Belt and Road Initiative. And there is another question which nobody is asking. Because of this reason, how many million less of people emigrated from South Asia, Middle East, and Africa to Europe, or from Latin America to North America? Again, this is going into millions. So actually, the more developed part of the world, Europe, North America, should should appreciate Belt and Road Initiative of China, because it is another factor contributing to diminishing the immigration pressure, which is a very big challenge in my part of the world, and we are not able to address this challenge in a proper way. So for that reason, I'm in a positive appraisal of Belt and Road Initiative, and there is still one aspect which is supposed to be discussed even more. China came first with this bold infrastructure investment and economic assistance project towards Global South or developing countries. And only then, ex post, afterwards, there was the response of the United States with their program, and there was the response of the European Union with our program, European Gateway, which is much smaller than the Belt and Road Initiative. So we see also a kind of competition between China, European Union, and the United States vis-à-vis investing, engaging with economic cooperation, infrastructure investment with the countries of Global South, which is a positive factor for development of this very positive South. The more that type of rivalry, that type of competition is, the better. That is the good recipe for the future, not, the military competition.
As you know, this year marks the 50th anniversary of China-Europe relations. And given your experience of working both in academia and in politics in Europe, how do you assess the current China-Europe relations?
Far from perfect, but not as bad as, for instance, the U.S. China's relations. Basically, the critical issue, from my perspective, is the economic cooperation. But the problem is that the European Union is only a union by name. So there are some internal contradictions between the countries, the states of the European Union. And for that reason, I think to coordinate the policy from Brussels' perspective towards China is a little bit more complex than the other way around. But my general evaluation is a positive one. It is visible if we take a look into the amount of trade, export, import, both directions, transfer of technology, but also cultural exchange. So I expect much more than we have accomplished so far, but definitely the world has changed during these 50 years of Chinese-European cooperation for better. Much more could be accomplished, if not the policy mistakes, especially on the European side. So I'm looking into the future with some some optimism.
Since you mentioned the European Union in Brussels, I want to ask, because I've read a theory a lot. It says there's a duality in China-Europe relations where on the European Union level, the two sides seems not to be doing so good. But on a country-to-country basis, China-Europe relations is pretty strong. So what's your take on that?
There are the countries so small as Malta or Luxembourg, about 400, less than 500,000 of people. Small countries like Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. And then there are the very big countries, which are by very nature much more influential. Basically, in this is Germany, France, but also Italy and Spain, and then my country, Poland. So therefore, the relative strength of a particular member of the European Union for the overall policies of the European Union, including relation, cooperation, arguing, etc., with China, is a different one. And then you can go from point to point to point and study which country, which is the member of the European Union, is more engaged in economic, cultural, technological capital exchange with China. So there are the countries which are more engaged in this exchange, and therefore they are trying to make an impact upon the other countries and the European Union as such, to go farther, deeper, stronger into this cooperation. So from this perspective, we are so-called European Union, but the overall relations between EU and China depends very much on what is like the attitude in Germany, in France, in Italy, in Poland. The more these countries are in favor of enlarging and deepening the Chinese-European cooperation, the better, I think, for each and every country which is involved.
Some argue that there is a strategic hesitation in the current China-Europe relations. Do you think what you've just said contribute to that hesitation? And where does that come from?
The things happen the way because many things happen at the same time. There are some internal processes, there are some international environment, and there's also some pressure from outside. You can bet that the United States, and especially under the second Trump administration, is not very much in favor of deepening cooperation between anybody and China, including the European Union. So I can see it also from the perspective of my country, that there are different means of American pressure not to go farther with developing relations with China. So the US is intervening with the country's policies vis-à-vis China in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, but also in the European Union. And then we go to square one. It depends on the interest. China is very competitive and depends in what sector of the economy one is involved. As a worker, employee, or employer, businessman, some of them, they are taking cream of cooperation with China, and some of them, they pay the cost because they are not able to stand the competitiveness of China's industries, especially manufacturing. So for that reason, if one will say engage in motor car industry in Poland or Slovakia or Spain, it's hardly very sympathetic towards deepening cooperation with China, because China is now a strong competitor, especially on the field of electrical vehicles. And some of the people over there, yes, some of them, they lost the job. You cannot expect from them to be pro-Chinese, especially since they are told that you have lost the job, not because of the wrong domestic policy, because of competition from China, and they are being also fed by the misinformation that this Chinese competition is unfair. And these problems which we have with economic growth, income, employment, restructuring, are being exploited for the reason of domestic political fight. And some simply are just using this sinophobic instrument as the instrument, their means to their political ends. So this is a complex issue. There is not just one reason, one factor. It is a combination, because one more time, the things happen the way they do because many things happen at the same time.
I think we can all agree that in today's world, we can not try to cope to every short-term geopolitical fluctuations or tensions. We have to find a way to rise above it and find a way to grow together. First, what sector do you think holds the greatest potential between China and the European Union to do that? And the second is, how can the two sides actually rise above the current geopolitical tensions?
Geopolitics may make the situation more complex, and I'm afraid that before it will improve, it will deteriorate still further because of very many factors. One factor is the current stage of the Cold War, which was initiated by the United States, especially against China. Another aspect is the trade war, which is fueled by ill-advised Trumponomics, but there's also very strong technological competition. We do have a very big problem. It is a much bigger problem in Europe, in the European Union, than here in China, with getting out of control mass migration of the people from different parts of the world, from Asia, from Middle East, from Africa, and it is hardly manageable in the European Union. It is again contributing to the social and political tensions. So therefore, execution of rational economic policy is quite difficult. But first of all, business sector, I think much more than the political elites, they do understand that the sound, firm economic cooperation in China in the long run is in the interest. So business people, not everywhere and in each and every sector, are in favor of developing economic cooperation with China, transfer of capital, know-how, joint ventures, trade, export, import, etc. Which sector? I think that now, first of all, I would say number one is the industries supportive for renewable energy. Here, to the surprise of many, not to my surprise, I was following the suit for the many years, and I've seen how much Chinese government, China's policy was engaged in subsidizing, in promoting the development of renewable energy sector. And now China is at the edge, is leading as far as the wind turbines are concerned, the solar photovoltaic energy, etc. And here we, in the European Union, but not only, we are lagging behind. So instead of imposing, import duty tariffs for renewable energy equipment coming from China to Europe, we should push more further our economies, our businesses for joint venture. Second sector, which is maybe something new, recently being brought to the fore, this is shocking for many, progress of pharmaceutical sector in China. Until recently, China was seen as a secondary player, generic medicine that was developed here based on imitation, not an invention. And now, to the surprise of many, we see in other countries, North America, Japan, Australia, and again, European Union, that vis-a-vis certain aspects of these pharmaceutical products, China has got an advantage. So therefore, the question is how to engage in what we would say in China win-win cooperation. So I would say these two sectors, but one more time, again, motor car. Motor car, not only electrical vehicles, but especially electrical vehicles. But there is plenty more when we can cooperate. But if you are asking for particular sectors of manufacturing, I would point to this very tree.
As a country, Poland, that has been deeply impacted by the Second World War, how do you think, how important it is for China and Japan and perhaps the world to uphold the post-war structure to promote peace?
It's extremely important. We are from different parts of the world. But as you mentioned, 80 years ago, what was over, that was the World War. We are in one world. We are Europe, you are Asia. But the tensions which do happen in one place and another place, somehow there are feedback, they are linked. I think that what is now going on here in China, the reaction for ill-advised comment of Prime Minister of Japan, Mrs. Taikachi, it's something what you may compare between the relations between Poland and Russia. 80 years ago, the Soviet army was fighting the German Nazis, moving all the way to Berlin, and same as China, arm with America, was fighting the Japanese militarism, and Taiwan was occupied by Japan till 1945, till the end of the war, same as Poland was occupied by the German Nazis. And it has changed here with the assistance of US, in Poland with the assistance of the then Soviet Union and Russia. Now the situation has changed completely. And now we have improved our relations with Germany, which we were fighting 85 years ago. So for that reason, I think that one more time, it is good to listen to men of state like President Xi Jinping and to ask us, and then in Japan, in Germany, in Russia, in Poland, in China, what it is global initiative for peace, global governance initiative, global cultural initiative. This global initiative of President Xi Jinping are pointing to the direction, if not of the solutions, at least for a dialogue, negotiations, how to improve the things.
Because some of the comments that I've read on the internet is that many people don't understand why the question over Taiwan is such a big deal. Can you explain to them just how important is the Taiwan question to China and to the post-Second World War order?
One point is that we, the people of academia, intellectuals, we have to make our voice heard. What is the truth? How the history has evolved? Who was an invader? Who was fighting for what reason? And how the situation looked. And for that purpose, I'm afraid that in a lion's share of the world, there is not a full understanding why the Taiwan question is so critical, so important for China. The Taiwan question is being used as an instrument for the political fight within the world. More often than not, they listen, they hear in the US, in Western Europe, that China is a potential aggressor for Taiwan and you do not have any rights to Taiwan. It's a different narrative. And it is going without further deeper explanation. Very many people, they are not aware even of the fact that Taiwan was occupied and in a very nasty, brutal way by Japan since the end of 19th century till 1945. And at that time, we both, America, West, were fighting with Japan also for getting Taiwan back to China.
Since you mentioned the United States several times, how would you assess the China-US relationship right now? Because a lot of things have happened in 2025.
US-China's relations are absolutely critical for the whole world. This is the relation between two most powerful countries, which are competing vis-a-vis economic might, but also critical for the future development technologies. But also, what is very important, China and US is also competing for influence, including economic one and to the extent political one, in so-called global South. I can tell you the story. I'm here in Beijing this time for teaching my students international MBA program at the famous Beijing Normal University. There is 88 students from 43 countries, mostly from Asia and Middle East and Africa. And it is very interesting because my class is on geopolitical changes and the influence upon economic development. So I'm explaining also to my international students here in China how this competition between US and China is making an impact of the chances, prospects for economic development. So one must see the rivalry between China and the US, not only as who is stronger, etc., but also who has more to gain or to offer to the other parts of the war. My second point is that, of course, I see these relations negative, and especially because of the current American administration. I just published recently an international bestseller new book, which is called Trump 2.0, Global Disruptions and Power Shifts, where I am addressing the questions you have just raised. What is the sense and nonsense of this Trumpism, Trumponomics, second Trump presidency from the viewpoint of sustainable development of the world? On the one hand, you have Trumpism. On the other hand, you have the global initiative of China's leadership, of China's president. These two approaches are incompatible. They are just going into different directions. So for that reason, the more chances for improvement of American relations, the better. I was keen to learn what was the message after the recent telephone call conversation between President of China and President of the United States. It is so good that they at least met face-to-face recently in South Korea and Busan during the APEC summit, and now we know that President Trump will visit China. Such a visit is always an occasion to solve the tensions which are over there, but don't expect too much improvement as long as Donald Trump is in the White House. He still has over 3 years, of his second term, and what is being done within the United States and on the international scale by the Trump second administration is a very negative one. This is it's something which is difficult to understand for professional economists, because not this time President Trump, it happened a little bit earlier. They declared trade war against China, and they are losing this trade war. The U.S. has not the ability to conquer, to defeat China as far as trade war is concerned. How unwise it is to start the war which you cannot win. It was obvious for professionals, for technocrats, for common sense people that the U.S. is not able to win the trade war with China.
Well, Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for this edition of The Hub. Thank you for tuning in, and bye for now.